Hey there. Um, I will be doing what I think will be an experiment to see how, well, I don't really know what I'm doing right now. I just would like to try and relate an experience I had on mushrooms last year. It's drawing close to being a year ago. I think it was in the month of May or early June, but no, I think it was in May, mid-May. I did it. And I don't really know what will come out of this, what this will lead to, but I would just try to see if I'm able to explain this experience and comment on some of the things that I learned from it, and just as a fun experiment. So the experience I'm about to tell about is an experience that I don't know if it probably did change me in ways that I can't currently comprehend, but I think the most important thing about this experience I had was the insight into the nature of the mushroom it gave me, and this is something I haven't really seen a lot of people talking about, um, besides from Terence McKenna, most notably. Um, but it is an aspect of the whole mushroom experience that I think has been neglected from mention, and quite unrightfully so. So what I will be doing is that I'll try to first just explain the timeline of what happened, and perhaps um, as I go on doing that, explain or add some pieces of information to make it first of all comprehensible, but also to add some comments on what I was having in regard to realization and so forth, as these phenomena occurred to me. I did the I did a 7 gram or somewhere between 6 and 7 grams, and I did them about 20 minutes past 7 p.m. And my father was home that day, and he knew about this experience I was about to have. I was 19 at the time. I'm 20 now. And he was pretty, he was largely au fait with what I was about to do. Um, he just cautioned me to be respectful of what I was about to do, and but he didn't really have much. Um, he didn't have many compunctions about it, which to you guys might seem a bit strange, given that most parents wouldn't normally be okay with their children doing these kinds of things. But I think I still have a very strong relationship with my father, and that really was the whole basis of why we could trust each other in this regard. So I think it's best if you're doing something like this as a young, perhaps a teenager. I wouldn't recommend the teenagers do this, at least not most of them, because I don't think most people are mature enough at that age to really be able to cope with the experience that you're presented with, um, upon ingesting these compounds. You should proceed with caution and with plenty of research having done prior to the experience. So let me get into what happened specifically, and yeah, get into this experience. So prior to doing the dose, I had been reading Aldous Huxley, the Doors of Perception, or specifically the last the second essay in that two essay collection, Heaven and Hell. The reason I had been reading, or I had just been, I had been coursing through a lot of the pages, just reading them pretty like fast and without going too much into details. I just wanted to have an idea of how I may avoid a bad or hellish experience, which is certainly a risk uh, that is associated with having these experiences. And I think it was a good thing for me to do because it really made me like the result of reading those pages and reacquainting myself with Aldous Huxley's philosophy on doing psychedelics was that it helped me to it really grounded me in a belief that I would be able to bring into the experience uh, what do you call that, you know an attitude of inquisitiveness and curiousness and trust. And if I did that, the mushroom would trust me and repay me with some kind of consideration, if you could call it that. So, but it took me a while actually to get myself like to build up the courage to actually do the dose. I usually like this is a very common phenomenon with me. I usually stare like at the dose for like at least 15 minutes before I gather up the courage to ingest it because these experiences really like they really do inspire me with a lot of awe and justifiably so. I think anyone should really be very cautious with these experiences, and you shouldn't do them with the intent of having a good time because you won't have a good time. That's not what you're going to experience with these things. You're going to experience something of a completely different world, especially at the high doses, and even at the moderate and lower doses. You shouldn't do it with the intent of having a blast or having a good time with your friends. I think the best way to do them is to do them alone, in the sense that you can have people in the household that would be able to step in if things turn south. But you shouldn't be surrounding yourself with multiple individuals because as Terence McKenna so eloquently said, like when you're doing this with another person, there is a third guest at the table, and that is culture. And it will sort of restrain you having from going really deep within yourself and acquainting yourself with the mushroom, which I think the purpose of these experiences is. That was at least what I learned, I think, during this experience. So I finally gathered up the courage to do the dose, and I ingested it, and um, started pacing nervously around my room because, my mind state was pretty fraught with anxiety at this point and uncertainty, um, at the very least. About 20 minutes later, I went for a walk I had decided beforehand to go on, because I had been, out in that afternoon, and just, the weather was really nice, and like I lived very close to this nature area, this very scenic place with there was this very big lake at the middle, and then you could walk around it and following this path. And I had been like I walked there like almost every day during that period because I was about to move soon, so I wanted to enjoy this place as much I could during that last period of residence nearby. Um, and I also thought that being in nature and being in that beautiful place would have the capacity to sort of make me avert some of those potentially bad effects, um, if I were to get caught up in a panicky state of mind, um, or if the mushroom confronted me really strongly without me being prepared for it. So I went for the walk, and as I'm walking, I start to feel something a little bit like some kind of come up signals. I just felt how my emotional state started to deepen and become more nuanced. I could really feel what I was feeling in that moment, and I started getting anxious about the people around me, and reconsidering whether this was actually a good idea to be out in nature and around people at this point. I was walking. There was this family walking in front of me on the sidewalk, and they were walking the same direction as me, so like away from me. But I was like, oh, should I go like on the other side? But no, I would have to go back, and that would just look weird. And I was having all these inner speculations. And luckily, they actually themselves crossed the road to not because of me, but just they had to go in another direction, and that really sort of eased my mind. And I came to this bridge with the highway, because like right next to the lake there was this highway, and I had decided to go around this, and you can cross the highway again on the other side, and then you would come to the lake, just to give you a sense of where I was environmentally. Um, so as I stop and I gaze over this great landscape just opening up to me, and the cars rushing by on the road um, below the bridge. And I was really like, I got a very emotional at that point, and I had a sense that this was going to be a good experience. I was sort of um, infused with a lot of confidence at that point, and I proceeded to walk into the area. And this is like, as I reached the path that I'm going to follow, I um I slowly start to feel how my mind just starts taking these strange turns in thinking processes that aren't typical of my normal cognition. I became very aware of how the mind is actually a very complex mechanism, that it's not really like you can feel, you can have many different thoughts. Like it's really unbelievable just how complex our brains actually are. And another very interesting um, effect or phenomenon I became aware of was the fact that I became able to discern when I was going between a left hemisphere mode of thinking or perceiving and a right hemisphere mode of perceiving. To make things short in this regard, because to go down this path would really divert us from the intended topic of this discussion, of this of this, yeah, telling of my experience. But the right hemisphere is a lot more, it sees the greater picture around you. It perceives everything that is going on in your vicinity, but it doesn't really let the left hemisphere know about it, because it's not important for it to know. Actually, as I understand our brain functioning is that it is actually very efficient, so that it excludes all that is not necessary to complete the specific task at hand, um, so that you don't get overwhelmed by sensory input. But the right brain is taking care of all that sort of like standby autopilot, doing its own thing, and allowing for the left hemisphere to focus at one thing at once, so that you can actually do something. Otherwise, you would just be like sitting there paralyzed with amazement at all the different things going on around you. It's only when some noise in the surroundings become sort of assume a menacing appearance that you become like that the right hemisphere alerts the left hemisphere to that signal. And I could feel that when I was walking like under this bridge at the other end, uh, coming to the lake. And I think I heard this strange sound under the bridge. um, and I turned around and I looked under, and you could see the water, and there was this little slope. And I got this weird sense that like maybe there's a witch living in there, and it's strange how I had that, impulse, or this, yeah, I don't even like this caprice that there might be living a witch in there, because my rational left hemisphere would of course object to that and be, "Ah, can't be right. Witches don't exist but in fairy tales and mythology, so why would you be thinking that?" And I don't really know why I was thinking that, but I think it was an interesting point, or an interesting note, compared to how ancient people used to perceive their surroundings, as being animated with all these different magical creatures, which from a Jungian standpoint, of course, would be psychic projections of an internal subconscious reality. Um, Again, you would have to read Jung on that yourself to be more informed about that, because I can't go into details. But I could feel how they were shifting between being nervous and perceiving something that was a strange sound or something like I didn't understand, and then locating the sound and the source of the sound, and being assured and that now I knew what it was and I didn't have to be afraid of it, because it was just some bird, or some like the water, like making a sound on the stones as it was rushing by some of the inlets from there was this river running down that feeds the lake water by some tunnels underneath the path. And I was hearing these things and becoming a little high strung. And then as soon as I located the sound, then I could calm down, and I went into back into the left hemisphere, and was oriented back toward my purpose with this experience, which was to keep on moving, and to proceed further into this psychological terrain that was opening itself up before my eyes. So I come to this place where there's a platform, um, where from which you can have a vantage point at the lake, almost at the middle of the lake, and or not on the lake, but at from the side, and I stopped, and I went onto the platform, and I just stood there taking in the new sensations, because I was proceeding into the come up of the experience. Um, and now was really when things started to change, because as I'm looking in the water, I can see the visual effects coming on, and they manifest themselves as a what I can only describe as a female lake deity, whom I can suddenly see, like whose face becomes visible in the lake, and her face seems to be constituted by a myriad of other faces, but sort of coalescing into this composite face that is looking at me. And I realized that this female lake deity, whatever this really was, knew I was there. Like she knew that I knew that she knew I was there. and 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 as I sort of fixed my gaze on her, we were having this, I would call it an exchange of knowing presence, of knowing the other's presence. And I think this was really the mushroom disguising itself as an internal, or at this point externalized but internally dwelling psychic image, which Jung would call the anima. And the anima is the feminine counterpart to the masculine personality. So since I'm a man, from a Jungian standpoint, it is only my masculine personality that has been made conscious. Um, and he mentions he sort of evidentiates this, or somehow makes a case for this by stating the fact that as a man you have a majority of male genes and a minority of female genes from the mother, um, and the greater number of male genes is what makes you a male. But you still have this minority of female genes, and they form this second personality that remains unconscious and actually becomes a personification of the unconscious when it wants to speak to you, which is what happens with the psychedelic experiences. Remember that the word psychedelic, etymologically speaking, means it comes from psyche delos, which means, or delay, if you were to like decline it in accordance with the noun, but I won't get into that. But psyche, of course, means life. It's associated with the word psychein, which means to breathe in Greek, in ancient Greek. So it's also the breath. It's the life-giving breath. And delay. I can't remember where the accent is actually placed here, but I think it's dele, which means manifest. So it makes the psyche manifest. And the psyche, when you're a man, is feminine, and therefore the mushroom would bring that to the surface, quite literally, the surface of the water. And I was standing there for some time, just having this kind of like subverbal exchange with this female deity dwelling in the lake. And I continued to walk, and I realized that now I'm seeing a multitude of female faces, like these nymphic faces around me, and they're really just like, it's just the faces really, and they're just staring at me, not saying anything, not motioning, not moving around, just completely settled, staring at me. And I don't feel threatened by their presence. I realize them to be what they are, which is an externalization of an internal psychic image, namely the anima image, or the anima imago. Um, and you might think I'm trivializing the experience by reducing it to a psychological reality, but like, again, psychological means like it comes from the word psyche, so, and that is really what the psychedelic experience is concerned with, namely the manifestation of the psyche. So the best way to really be parsing these experiences is through a psychological language, a psychological terminology. So as I'm walking, the effects are increasing, and I feel it as a sedation in my body. So I feel like my body feels very heavy, of course, as is very notorious with mushrooms, and my thinking is just dissolving by the second. And I'm pretty at peace with what is happening. There aren't so many people around at this point. So, and even when there are, I'm not more nervous than if I were high and walking by someone on the path. It's not really that bad, because like I know that they can't really know. So that keeps me sort of calm, and then I'm not really doing anything that like really illegal here. I know that formally speak, like legislatively speaking, it would be illegal, but I'm not harming anyone. I'm not really disturbing anyone. I'm just quietly walking here, and if I just keep doing that, then why would anyone want to bother me? Like, people don't really care that much about you, and you sort of forget that when you smoke weed or when you do some psychedelic compound. You tend to forget how little people really care about your presence. They just want to be on their way, and if you are out of their sight as soon as possible, they don't really care about more about that than, if that tree is just passing by. It's a little like it requires a little more attention with a person, because they could be dangerous, whereas the tree would just be at least normally speaking, and like normally perceived to be an inanimate object. So I'm just walking, and I start to feel this connection with the more ancient layers of my psyche and my biology in general. I feel as if I'm this caveman, like 10,000 years BC, just walking through his natural habitat, because this was my natural habitat at this point. And the mushroom was sort of reminding me that this was actually where this is actually where a person would normally belong in nature, walking along the path and just being being one with the surroundings, which I was increasingly becoming. I was going from that very um, compartmentalized left hemisphere modality into a more holistic perception of myself, and the surroundings, this ego established boundary between the self and nature was getting dissolved by the second. And it felt very peaceful. I wasn't, disturbed by it because I knew it would be happening. I was actually very glad that it was happening because it was a proof that the experience was going to be what I had expected and hoped for it to be. So I'm walking through this landscape, this habitat of mine, and I come by this other platform that reaches over the lake. Actually, it's sort of like I can't really. I'm not from the US or the UK. I don't normally speak English, so I don't know all the words. But this floating platform on the water, and I stepped onto it, and I closed my eyes because I was interested how intense the closed eye visuals would be. And as I'm closing my eyes, I'm seeing all of these landscapes, these pyramids and different like mazes and I also see these female creatures. I always see the female creatures. Also in my other mushrooms experience, that the previous ones, I have seen these female creatures, these anima entities, and they were dancing around and doing some Egyptian dancing stuff, and I sort of like that. Perhaps not exactly, but something akin to that. And I was getting a little more, edgy about that because it was a lot more intense than if I had just than when I had my eyes open. But still not something I was deeply concerned about. So again, I'm just becoming more in one with nature, and I can feel the presence of the mushroom becoming greater. At first, it was just a subtle intimation, and now I can feel like something is moving in my brain. It's working in my brain, and it's doing things. It's showing me things about nature, about evolution, about biology. And I was seeing this very complex image of what the world actually is. Like I was gaining insight, I think, into the deep knowledge of the mushroom, because the mushroom is a very ancient entity. It has been around for a very long time, and it knows a lot about nature, much more than we do. Like mushrooms are at least 500 million years old. You can't comprehend that as a person who has only lived at that point 19 years. And I knew this great force was working in my brain and was giving me access to ever more information about myself and my place in nature. And I was getting these very deep insights into the human history, how we had become humans, and what had happened with us comparing compared with other creatures to be found on this planet. And I realized that we had actually sort of committed a sin against nature. And this is not something that was new to me. I had read about this in Greek mythology, and the Christian, religion also touches very profoundly on the subject of committing the sin against God and eating of the apple, becoming individuals and separating ourselves from nature, developing technology. In the play, the Greek play written by, at least presumably written by Aeschylus, um, or properly pronounced Aeschylus, um, we see Prometheus as this figure who has stolen the Olympic fire and given it to humankind so that they could have some advantage over the other creatures, because we hadn't been given anything. We had no claws, no teeth, no strength, no, like, we were just naked creatures living in caves, never venturing out into the sun, according to this myth. And he was actually like, there is this one sentence: kai mate syllήβδην πάντα βραχεῖ μύθῳ, πάντα τέχναι, Brotois ek Prometheus. Sorry, I'm this sentence is a little bit far back into my mind, but it means that learn everything collectively in a short phrase. All of the mortals' arts, inventions, technology, tέχναι, comes from Prometheus. It was that act of giving us the fire from Olympus that made us technological creatures, and we stepped out of the archaeological era and entered into the historical era with the rise of the Sumerian Empire as the initial step into history. And so I knew these stories, and I knew this phenomenon of becoming separated from nature. But the mushroom was sort of building on that, because perhaps because it knew, it could see that I knew these things, and it wanted to sort of elaborate on it, and it showed me a lot of connections I wouldn't myself have been able to piece together. And I was having these realization as I was walking, and the ego was just starting to dissolve as well. Not completely yet. It's always, sort of a gliding phase. And reached this point where I've actually traversed, or not traversed, but I've sort of almost circled the lake entirely now. And I come to this point I had decided would be my sort of ending point on this journey, um, which is this little not really a dell or a dale, but it's difficult to describe. Just it was a place fairly open with some fields, and there was some kine grassing, or some cows around, and I was sitting in there between these fields, and viewing the lake. And as I was sitting there, I could really feel the mushroom now. And when I was looking around, there were all these nymphs, like the faces of them were all around me, just looking at me and perceiving me. And I was not threatened by them in the least. I was actually happy that they were there. And I felt at home. Like I felt like this moment, this place, this specific activity right now of doing absolutely nothing, just sitting with the mushroom, with like in the bosom, like at the bosom of Mother Nature, I felt was the epitome of what I could be doing, of what I should be doing. And I started to become it started to become very difficult for me to separate myself from the surroundings conceptually, because I started to feel myself as being the entire landscape and being all of what was around me. And I was getting a little, I was not nervous about the ego death per se. It was more the fact that I wasn't in a safe environment, because I could run into someone, and it's not the best thing to lose your ego when you're in public. So I just wanted to get home. But as I looked up, and I could see like there was this little woods, some 300 meters away, and at the very top, like at the very crowns, like just above the very crowns of the trees, above the skyline of the wood, the I could see these UFOs, and I was thinking like, why are they here? Like I'm in nature right now. Why would there be UFOs? Um, and I was getting this very eerie sense of something extraterrestrial approaching on me. And this was the point where the experience went from being very peaceful and very calm and very balanced to being something I was not sure I would be able to handle. So I decided to go home. And as I'm moving away from this beautiful scene of nature, I'm moving back into the society, just like not even 2 minutes away. Um, I start to sense how unnatural it is for people to be living in these suburban or urban areas. Like we aren't supposed to be living like this. This isn't our nature. We feel much more in touch with ourselves when we are in our natural surroundings. And I could hear the cars, and I could see some of the lights, like traffic lights, and it was just not really that. Um, it was not that pleasant, I think would be the word. I started to feel a little more nervous, and my ego was rebuilding itself. And I finally get home. It wasn't more than 2 minutes at the top, and I go into my garden. My father had went to bed. He had gone to bed at this point. He's an he's a very, very early sleeper, and it was I think 15 past 9 again p.m. and it was getting a little darker, and I sit down in the garden, and I have this. There was this great tree. I can't even remember what kind of tree, but like a majestic tree, and it was so beautiful. Like in the rosy glow of late evening, and I started to feel like the presence of this tree to an extent I wouldn't normally be able to perceive, and I felt like I was surrounded by these divine powers. And when I closed my eyes, I could see these nymphs, and they were leading me through these paradisical gardens, it seemed. And at this point, actually, the experience started to assume a very sexual energy, a very anima related um, energy would be my label for that. Because these anime figures were around me, and I could almost visualize there was this specific girl I saw her as sexually attractive, and I could almost see her sitting there next to me, and she looked very apish at the moment because everything was just turned back, like evolutionarily speaking. So every person around me was really just a talking ape, and I felt these very strong sexual energies welling up within me, and not much happened about it. I just perceived it, and I was getting a little nervous by it because these were very strong powers not to be messed with, and I realized like how deep sexuality really is. It's a very deep force, and we shouldn't mess around with it. We should respect it, and I think that's really why a lot of religious traditions place such great stress on the sanctity of monogamy and of dedicating yourself to a single partner, because you could easily become slave bound to your own sexuality if you don't watch it. And I think that's really, unfortunately, a very common a very common result of engaging in too much polygamous or polyamorous behavior, is that you really lose your control over the sexuality, and it should be harnessed. It should really be focused on a specific person, in order to remain under your own control. Um, that was really just a moralistic side note there, and you can do what you want. I'm just telling my own opinions. You can like them, you cannot like them. That's really not the point. I'm just telling you about the experience I had, and adding some comments on it, perhaps to clarify a bit what might have been associated with it. Um, so this is where I start to feel very anxious. I can't really explain why. I didn't even know why at the moment. I just felt very, very anxious, and I I went inside because I just felt like it would be better if I went to my room, and I did that. And as I go into my room, I started to hear these. Maybe I had been hearing them a bit before. These voices speaking a language I couldn't understand, and just almost immediately as I lay down, I could really start to hear them very clearly now. And I closed my eyes, and suddenly an alien face just popped up right in front of my face, and it looked like nothing I could ever describe. Like it had some anthropomorphic characteristics, but a lot of characteristics that weren't humanly related at all. But I could see that it looked somewhat like a human to some extent. And it was like very like that I was there. Like it was surprised at seeing me, and it sort of like seemed to be calling for someone. And suddenly, like a whole myriad of these faces, somewhat similar but still distinct, but of the same species or race or what you want to call it, started popping up, and they were shouting like over each other, and I don't really know what they were saying because I didn't understand the language, and they sounded like they were angry. Like if I'm if I should try to imitate, like if I were to try to imitate what they somewhat sound like, it would sound something like something like that. Something completely incomprehensible, and I was very much overwhelmed by that and wanted it to go away because I wasn't prepared for that intensity. And it sort of did at some point, but I was still like swirling around in some kind of like it felt like a hurricane of 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 you know of extraterrestrial information, and I had this sense that the mushroom would like it would have to have contact with some of these places where these creatures were to be found, because they were completely autonomous. They weren't related to my imagination, like they didn't exist within me. And this was the point where I started to go beyond the collective unconscious, which was where the experience had primarily been taking place up to that point with the UFOs. It started to change into something a lot less earthly and a lot more cosmic. And now was when the mushroom was really becoming very present, and it was sort of shedding its its symbolic shroud, like the anima cloaking and just going directly for what it actually was. To some extent, not completely showing itself, still sort of hiding around in the shadows, not completely telling me, but I felt like this is not a mushroom. This is not like what I've just eaten was like it was receptacle for something a lot more powerful and a lot more serious than just like a silly mushroom. Um, and it started to show me all of these things, and it was sort of analyzing me as it was happening, like it was analyzing like human beings through me. Not like it didn't know me, like it knew what I was. To me, like to the mushroom, I was nothing but a naked ape who had learned to walk upright and talk and put on a semblance of of intellect. That was really what it perceived me as. And I had to give the mushroom its due. Like I was actually that was that is what I am, and what all of us are. Um, I'm sort of reflecting on how to proceed with this story because was really where it started to become like to reach the level where I couldn't possibly relate anything of what really happened because I was having a conversation, or well, there was actually more of a soliloquy going on from the mushroom to me, and I couldn't really. I tried to make some requests for things to show me, and it just flat out ignored it and chose to show me something completely different instead. I was hearing this caveman singing like this shamanistic kind of like not even music, not even singing, just the production of human speech, like hoo hoo ha 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 hoo hoo ha 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 hoo hoo hoo. These kind of sounds, not like ape sounds, human sounds, but with these like these phones were being pronounced um, very like monotonously and rhythmically, or yeah, it had a sort of a rhythm, but also a bit arrhythmical. Um, and all these things were going on. I can't really tell much more about it. And at some point, I started to realize I was coming down. That was actually a good thing because you like to come down. Um, And this was the point where I was still in that interface between being normal and being in an altered state. And this was actually where I came up with some project I wanted to start on. And I realized I wanted to invent my own language, and I would like to write, to compose my own mythology as a way of trying to explain human nature. Because during this experience, I had been confronted with certain archetypes, um, and one of them was Mother Nature, whom I chose to appellate Ma in my language. Just a word that came to me. It sounds very much like mother, mama, or something like that. And it was like intentionally so, I think. Oh, damn it. Great, now I'm back. I just had to replug my charger. Um, the battery was running low. So, but on with my project. I wanted to I had become confronted with the Mother Nature archetype Ma and the Sky Father. And again, these are very common mythological archetypes. They it wasn't really something new, but I was seeing them in this experience much more clearly as fundamental constituents of human psychology, and maybe even like nature's psychology. We don't really know much about nature and whether there is such a concept as Mother Earth. But during this experience, I had been confronted with some experiences, or some. I had been confronted with, I think, a realization that mythology is a lot more, like, it's a lot deeper than we normally think. Like, it actually has its own language and it tries to tell you something. But we have grown out of this old, like, right hemisphere centered mode of perception, and moved into the left hemisphere so much that we actually can't really understand these stories anymore. Even though we should, because they convey some very profound statements about human nature that we should not be uncautious about. And I think the most important, or the most menacing of the archetypes was, I don't know if he's really the devil. He might be. I don't know yet. But he's the never resting demon within our hearts that always craves some kind of action. It wants something to take place. And it can never really just sit still. Like, whenever you're sitting still, it will start to talk to you and tell you to do things. It wants to get into addictions as a way of getting away from the moment. It hates the moment. And I think, like, where it comes from might be, it might be a product of evolution. Like, it might be necessary for us to have this demon within us to survive in nature. I don't know. This was just, curious idea that took shape in my mind at that point, that maybe he's actually, and I do say he because I think he's a masculine force, and I called him Ergdum, 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 and I don't know what that means. Like, it's a part of my new, like, this language I'm trying to construct. And he he's the adversary of Irasiel, who is the son of light, and Ergtham is the son of darkness, and he's the insatiate demon that craves satisfaction but never really wants to have it completely, because then he would not really, that wouldn't be any purpose for his existence. I do think that he might actually be there, like, he might be a necessity for us to be able to eat and to maintain our viability. I don't know, but I think he serves a purpose. But I think he should be harnessed very, very strictly, and we should gain control over him. And I think Yirasiel would be the the candidate to do that. So this was really where my experience ended off, with this project in mind, and I started to scribble down some letters. I wanted to make my own writing system, and my own grammar and syntax and morphology and phonology and all of that. I wanted to compose my own language because I'm very interested in linguistics, which is what I'm studying currently. So with that in mind, that was where the experience dropped off, and my father had woken up at this point, and not because of me, just because he had a phase where he was going to work very early in the morning a lot of times, so his sleeping schedule was a bit, off. So it was not much more than 2 or 3 o'clock at night, and I went down to just tell him that I was all right and it had been an overall good experience, and he was happy about that. And yeah, and I just went out to smoke a joint, and so I could fall asleep, because I couldn't really like rest my mind. I tried, but I was just lying there. And I couldn't. I my mind was racing with reflections and ruminations and all of that. So yeah, that was really the experience. What did I learn from it? I learned that the mushroom is an intelligent species, that exists on this planet and has sort of infiltrated this Gaian system, which is the Earth, like the Earth's ecology. It knows about it. It knows about us. It knows about everything that goes on this planet. Um, it has sort of become the ambassador, I think, of this planet and of the wisdom it contains, because it can infiltrate information and or information structures like our brain. That's why it really likes to go into our brain and pick out information and learn about us, because it can do that. It can store the information. And with regard to the mushroom's psychology, if you could like talk about such a concept, I don't think it's an individual like we are. It's a collective. What I mean by that is when I was confronted with its intelligence, I was left with the sense that I'm not communicating with someone like me, because I can talk to a friend, and he would not be able to read what is going on in my mind. But I could sort of, you know, I could sort of iconically represent that in language, and he could interpret that and incorporate that into his own understanding of things. And that's really that's what we do. That the mushroom pointed that out to me, because it said, well, I was thinking about this philosophical conversation I'd watched on YouTube between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris on God. And it was like, oh, that's how you process information between each other. That's how you convey information. You do it through language. Um, and that's not how the mushroom does it. Like, it does it another way. It doesn't need language. And it's not like there's one mushroom talking to, like, it's one thing. At least that's what I understand so far. And my sense was that I should be establishing an allegiance with this intelligent species, because it may know things we would need to know. And this is something Paul Stamets has also talked extensively about, that we should really be respectful of the mushrooms, and seek to gain knowledge from them, because they know a lot about this world. And you might think it's silly that I'm talking about the mushroom as if it's some kind of intelligent species, but it is very intelligent, and it's much more intelligent than we are. It knows a lot more. um, and that's really what I was left with. Like, the mushroom is an intelligent being that knows so many things about so many things we could never even fathom, and it can be willing to share some of that information if you are deemed worthy of partaking of that information by the mushroom. It would have to see you as a person with whom it would like to share that information, because it's not just going to share it with anyone. That's why not all people go very deep into the experience, and reach the state where they can actually, or reach the stage where they can actually have a conversation with it. Like, most people, I don't know this for sure, but my perception is that most people never really get to that stage, and I don't think their mentality is right for the mushroom. It requires a specific, very inquisitive kind of person um, to to be worthy, for that person to be worthy of partaking of the secret mushroom wisdom. Um, so I hope this story, although it has been very long, but I needed to tell it in depth because otherwise, why do anything half-assed? That won't really yield the same result. So I hope that you were, perhaps as a person considering whether you should do this or not, that you could take some value from this, um, and perhaps also a fair degree of caution, um, because this is not something that should be done by just anyone. This is a very strong, potent experience that should be treated with utmost care. So I think this is what I have from for now, and we'll see if I do something like it in the future. Peace.